Good evening, everybody. So, ready to start another one. Tonight, I'm going to take a twist on last night, and we're going to talk a little bit more about gold sluicing and sluice boxes, specifically about gold sluice riffles that are found in nature. Did you know that there are gold sluice riffles found in nature? In fact, that's how gold prospectors figured it out in the first place. So let's take a look at that. Again, tonight, we're sponsored by the Gold Prospectors Collection. Check out sourdoughminer.com/GPC and see if you're interested. That's a special deal for the holiday, and you can check it out right now and just click that link. Well, can't click the link, but enter that link into your browser and away you go. Or look around. There'll be a link nearby on this page, on this post. So, what is this business about sluice riffles and sluice boxes in general? Well, what we have in a sluice is a series of obstacles that our gold is going to jump through. Let me paint it in colors that you can easily see. So we have these bars that run perpendicular to the flow. In this case, you can't see it behind the rocks, but you get the idea. Now, what are these bars up to? Well, they're causing turbulence in the flow and causing those circulations, those boils or eddies that go along, along the horizontal direction that cause the riffles to automatically classify the material and force the gold to settle out behind the zero velocity zone just back of the riffle. Now, we talked a little bit about that a couple weeks ago. But right now I'm going to talk about something a little different. And I'm going to talk a little bit, stretching it, because I've never built one the way I just read about it. But I have built them doing other things. So it's just that I'm going to talk about two different kinds, actually three kinds. And so let's go to the blackboard. Let's check to see if we got everybody coming on board, though, first. Make sure that we have everybody on board. Now, the principle here that we're talking about, these riffles, native riffles are really cool if you don't have any riffles. They're not so great compared to a good steel riffle or aluminum that's angled at the right angle, or plastic, because it has the right ability to create, not turbulent, laminar flow, and turbulence just where you want it. And so what happens is it gives it a much better chance at separating fines and coarse gold at the same time. The kind of riffles I'm talking about are just last ditch. This is what you do, and it's what the old guys did when they didn't have a riffle nearby. Because if you don't have a store near you, any riffle will do. So that's the idea. I'm checking my phone here for a second. I want to make sure we have our audio. Have a bunch of stacked up stuff on the page. Sometimes, Facebook gets a little backed up. That's a little weird. What you see from your perspective is a simple set of newsfeed things on your Facebook. What I see is I have a newsfeed, and then I have Facebook, and I have kind of a battle between the two. And on the Facebook side of things, the page management side, the tools could use to be improved a little bit. Hey, there's 39 of you guys. Good evening. That's great. So let's see what we got here. We got 14 comments already. I think that's right. Yeah. And all I see is a guy with a sluice box. Let's see what we got here. We got 14 comments already. So sounds good, loud and clear. Okay, we're going good. Let's go to our topic. Make sure Gary LaMountain says all I see is a guy with a sluice box. Do you see me? I'm there. There is a guy with a sluice box, and I marked up the sluice box where the sluice riffles are. Now, first hint I'll give you about native riffles is right here. Can anybody see what's going on in the river here and here? There's something special happening to the water flow that you should pay attention to for two reasons. One, this is where you can find gold. Two, you can arrange this kind of thing yourself and trap gold in essentially a sluice box that's made by nature. So first thing I wanted to point out is those areas that are behind where Josh is running the sluice. And that is this zone right here. And there's a still water zone out here. Fine gold will tend to settle out here. Coarse gold will tend to settle behind this guy. And so you want to kind of, actually coarser gold out front. Depends on the velocity. Now, that gets me to my second sluice riffle technique that I'll get into in a bit. But I'm going to draw a different drawing just to kind of make this clear. But pay attention to what's happening to the water flow through this region. Let me change crayons here a little bit. So, and specifically notice how the water is kind of running at full speed through here, and it's slow over here, and it's kind of, you know, dead over here because this is a dead zone. But right behind here is a bunch of boils. Okay, right up here is a bunch of laminar flow going like this, like crazy through this region. These are things that you can arrange by arranging the stones in the river in the right order. And so by arranging patterns in the stones, you can create your own natural riffle. It's not the greatest one on the planet, but if you don't have anything, any riffle will do. And specifically what you want to do is use stones that have nice flat sides and sharp edges, and then stack them in such a way and brace them so that you create essentially a turbulent eddy on the back side. And not too high a riffle so that you can actually trap out the gold. So it doesn't take much, but what it does take is making sure that everything's kind of clear and that you run the material down through the center. I'll get to that in a second. So this is kind of a, you know, keep your eye on the flow. Now, a couple things I want to show you. In this sluice box, this aluminum one, you can follow the flow by looking at essentially how deep the water is flowing. Notice it's dropping toward the end of the sluice as it goes out. That drop, the same amount of water is moving through every second. If it weren't, it would stack up and overflow the sides, but it doesn't. It essentially accelerates toward the end, and that causes the height, because the area is the same. The area is the amount of flow through a given area is dependent upon the speed. So as it speeds up, that vertical direction, or vertical dimension rather, has to decrease accordingly. Big hint. So what you're trying to do is create that kind of pattern in your own sluice, in the creek bed. In this case, it's done inside this aluminum shell, and then what happens is that essentially causes a lower flow toward the front, and that's where you want to have your mattings and all your good stuff to catch the fines. And then this back end is where you want to make sure that everything keeps clearing out, and the only thing that gets trapped back there would be some coarser gold. The coarsest gold, of course, is going to trap out right up front here. But the idea is, you know, essentially you're creating a situation where you're accelerating the flow as you go downhill. We're going to do the same sort of thing using sticks and rocks and cobbles. Never thought you'd do that, huh? So let's take a look on the blackboard device. Gold riffles in nature. So two things you can use. One is you can use poles with weights to get them to the bottom. And if you do, then what you're going to want to do essentially is, let me color it the right thing. So essentially you're going to want to create that same sort of pattern where you have this nice long set of riffles with a set of poles like this. And you can angle them any way you want to accelerate or decelerate the flow. And that's one of the tricks to this whole operation. You know, and the people I've talked to that have done this kind of thing, you know, the old timers swore by doing poles this longitudinal way. Now I can sort of understand why they would, because I would, in the middle of this, start stacking some cobbles, you know, larger cobbles in the middle here to create kind of an organized sluice bed with riffles. I'm not doing a real good job here. Somebody cheer me on quick. I need some support. Now, what are you going to do once you get this thing all? Because you want them side by side, each of these a certain height, and then some narrow sections in between. And then again and again, just keep stacking the rocks in such a way that you can create a natural riffle zone in between these. Now what you're going to end up doing is when you're all done with this thing, you're going to end up shoveling out the material that you run through it, scooping it out, and then putting that in your bucket, and you're going to separate that out. But you want to scoop it in such a way that just pull off the surface part above the rocks that you put on the lining on the bottom. Now why do you do all this? Well, the objective is to cause gold to trap out. Should have saved my gold colors. So cause the gold to trap out just behind each of these riffles in differing sizes. And then your objective would be to kind of get in there with a scoop and scoop out just behind the riffles as things clean through. You know, your inner material, piles of material through the front end here, shoveling it in and having it, you could probably set up some poles here like this to create a wider mouth to accelerate the first, you know, scoop the water into the system. And then once you drop this material in here, you let it, you know, bounce down the sluice box just like it would on a regular metal sluice box. Crude? Yes. Does it work? The old timers used to use them. Now, you can modify this slightly by essentially creating the same arrangement, but right here where we put these rocks, you can put some slats in here. As long as you can anchor the slats with some rocks on the ends to hold them in an angled position backwards or forwards, but angled. Now, forward is another way of doing sluice riffles. You know, there's different ways that people swear by, but you know, the most common one is to riffle backwards and create that flow over the top. But again, the slats, you know, if you have some wood nearby, or if you have some wood that you can split into sections where you can make little angular pieces, that would do the job. So the idea here is you're simply creating an environment where the water will boil, boiling not temperature, but boiling meaning it'll get into a sort of a turbulent eddy behind each of these in such a way that it will actually roll the water backwards. You know, if we had a slat in here like this, a big chunk of wood that kind of looked like this maybe, and the water came flowing down this way, essentially it would drop in and curl around and come out this backside this way. And what that means is that this is going to pack in with gold back in here and black sands, hopefully. You'll also, because you're not really allowing, you know, you don't have very much control to make this, the dimensions very small on these things. You could if you had control of the material, but generally you're going to have some pretty crude riffles, okay? That means you're going to have some pretty crude amounts of material, which you compensate with by dumping a lot more material in the front end of the sluice and just let this stuff build up. The objective would be to have several of these guys spaced nicely and not too high. Not too high meaning probably an inch or so high in this riffle, in the sluice box rather, your pseudo sluice, natural sluice, such that you're trapping the material. And then of course on the top of these, to hold them in place, you just stack them rocks. You know, you're pinning them down on the edges so that the water can flow between the rocks and the riffles catch the gold. Does that make sense? I'm making it clear. Kind of crazy idea. I just thought this might be an interesting thing in the context of what we talked about yesterday with, you know, getting gold prospecting going for the season. Sometimes you get stuck back in the canyons and you go, gee, I didn't bring my box, and look at that, there's a bunch of gold in my pan and I haven't got anything to concentrate it with, and it's a long hike to get back out. Well, you know, a stick, let's see, forget the metaphors. Poking the eye with a sharp stick, that doesn't work. Okay, so the idea is, you know, that this material again would tend to boil out and concentrate behind each of these sluice riffles. Let me color correctly. Show you where the gold is trapping here. So our gold is building up underneath this whole pile of rubble in the backside. There's a lot of other black sands and cobbles and rocks and junk that we'll be tripping over these things. But the objective would be to keep these things, you know, less than an inch high if you could. Just simply because unless you get more rushing water, then you can make it go faster. The problem with rushing water is you're going to blow your fines out the back end. So this again is, and it's a lot harder to tune one of these things because it's sort of a fixed slope. Once you grade it down the river, you know, you're stuck with whatever it is you got to deal with. So inch or less here, probably a good idea. And so that was my thought for the evening. Just a quick tip on what to do. So here we go. Richard Cortez says, I found out an old wooden ladder with steps down a stream one time, massive black sands and gold between the legs. There you go. a unintended sluice, but of natural materials, and that's what happens. And could only take half shovels at number 2. It was so loaded. That's amazing. And it's probably been there forever, so it's probably just had a good chance to concentrate for a long period of time. Anytime you see a log that's jammed across the river and it's been there for a couple of seasons, like this one we just had, check the backside, check the front side too, but check underneath where it's trapping material, especially if it's pinned to the bottom of the river. If it's not, it's no use. But if it's pinned to the bottom and kind of getting half buried in the sands and gravels, those sands and gravels down under the log may be very rich in black sands and gold. You got to check it out. Let's see. Had to replace my old wooden sluice. It just wore out here. So Steve Ford's been using wood for a long time. And then Christopher says, great education. Keep going. All right. Yeah, you're encouraging me. Watch out. So gold is lazy. It will drop out as fast as it can. I like to think of gold is kind of lazy in a sense, but insidious, because of the extra behavior, the extra gravitational pull on the gold itself. Because of its density, it will want to dive to the bottom. Now, I don't call that quite lazy, but it is lazy once it gets down there. Going there, a lot of people don't realize how fast in a slurry that stuff will go. It'll go like bang, to the bottom. It will bounce around on the material because there'll be a lot of cobbles and gravels and junk in a storm, moving downstream, bouncing like a washing machine agitator or cement mixer. And so, I liken it to, if you've ever watched cement roll off of a cement mixer and go down those chutes and around the way, and look at the gravels and things going down through there. It looks like fluid. But if you ever put your hand into it, it would just tear it off, because it's massive amount of material in there. It literally has mass. And so what happens is anything going through that is going to get pushed along in that viscous mess. Now, gold has a property, because of its gravitational effect and this density, it goes to the bottom in this parabolic trajectory very, very fast. And then, like Steve said, once it gets there, it doesn't want to go anywhere unless something bumps it along. We call that saltation. It causes the pebbles and rocks to bounce downstream. They also want to go down to the bottom. They just don't go as fast as gold does. Go figure. It's a good property to know lots about. Okay, so Douglas Towns here from Berlin, New Hampshire. Welcome. And Gary LaMontagne. I see is a guy with a sluice box. We talked about that earlier. I hope you're seeing a guy with more than a sluice box. This guy here. But again, when you're looking at one of these rivers, there's plenty of opportunity to grab these cobbles and rearrange them in such a way. The main trick is to arrange them in such a way that they don't make a huge barrier to the water. They just make the water boil as it goes down through them. And then you want to guide the sides so that you accelerate it at just the right amount so that your fine golds get trapped. If you go too fast, as we talked about before, the fine gold wants to go at about 1 foot per second to get to the bottom in a slurry mix. The coarser golds can take 1.5 feet to 3 feet. It just depends on how dense that gold is. The rocks you need to clear out are going to need 3 or 4 feet per second. So, the flow is going to have to vary a little bit in your design. And truth is, you're going to play with it a little bit, because I can't give you indications other than to say that as you narrow the mouth from front to rear, you'll accelerate that water going through. As you drop the water going through, in other words, you build those walls, you saw that drop as it went through the same width all the way through that aluminum sluice box. Let me flip back to it. So this same width from end to end, but notice the water again is flowing faster and faster as you go toward the bottom. In the back end here, there's probably only a 1/2 inch of water at the top. Up here, it's clear right up to the rails at 3 inches deep. And so it's clearly accelerating as it's going through there, even though it's the same thing. Where does that acceleration come from? The angle of the sluice. And so you want to make sure that you kind of control that angle so that you're getting the right amount of acceleration at each stage of your sluice. That's true of aluminum sluice. That's true of rock sluices. It doesn't really matter. You want to control that flow and kind of play with the rocks a little bit to get it to behave the way you want to. The tough part for a natural sluice is cleanup. You know, and that's true even of a wooden sluice. That's one of the big advantages of plastic over aluminum and aluminum over rock or wood, is that they're not as heavy, and so they can be rotated and put in a bucket and unclipped and cleaned out in a matter of, you know, seconds. And, you know, maybe take you a couple minutes to clean everything out and stack it up. Not to process it, but to clean out and get your black sand stacked into a bucket, and then you pile up the buckets on the shoreline as you're working. You want to keep working through the material. Once you start finding color, you just want to go as fast as you can through that sample hole to bedrock. And then once you find the sample holes producing, you're going to go even, you know, how much scale up am I going to do? That material you want to stage also with the right kind of prospecting tools. At that point, you may want to say, well, you know, this natural riffle idea is kind of bum. I'm finding lots of gold here, so I need to get my GPS, which I carried with me. I got sticks and rocks and a GPS. So anyway, you mark your place carefully so that you can get back to it, and then get out of there and get yourself some proper equipment. But to start with, you can use, you know, sticks, rocks, anything that you can use as a guide for the water and for a trip point for the riffle to cause that turbulent eddy on the backside. That causes the concentration through the self-classification of a boil hole, essentially a self-classifying riffle, causing this thing to bounce and jiggle and send the lighter material downstream and make the heavy stuff continue to concentrate. As it goes over, the heavy stuff settles out and the lighter stuff sifts away. If everything settled out, your first shovel would plug up your sieve, not your sieve, it would plug up your sluice. You don't want to do that. You want to make sure that that's always staying clean, whether it's a natural sluice or one of these sluices. Generally speaking, I never go over half the distance between these two riffles. If I find myself getting that too full, I slow down or I let it clear out. And then once it clears out, I try to keep enough sand so that I have an inch or two behind that front end riffle to keep it fine gold covered. The minute that fine gold gets uncovered, it goes downstream. So you're sort of in this teeter-totter balance between cleaning out the material and building it up. Clean it out, build it up. And that's the way you run a sluice box. And you want to tune it so you don't have to do that too often. You don't have to stop. Okay, so that's kind of it for tonight. I just thought I'd touch bases on sluice riffles in nature and what you could do if you didn't have the right tools in your hand. Just another one of those things. And again, check out GPC. Links above or below, and go take a look at it. It's an offer that we have going on for the holiday, and my son Josh is running the show on that one. So, but I'd like you to go look at it and tell me what you think. If you want to, try it. Catch you then. And it's got stuff about sluices. It's got stuff about pans. It's got stuff about, we talked about government gold maps and 2020. It's all on DVD. So check it out and see what you think. Catch you then. Good night. Good prospecting. Prospector Jess, over and out. Catch you then.